The world stopped. The news hit like a thunderclap across the screens of every fan, every follower, every heart that had ever been touched by his presence. Eric Dane was gone. Yet, even amid the raw grief, there was a whisper of something almost surreal, a fortune, carefully amassed and quietly curated, left behind. A legacy not measured merely in wealth, but in love, memories, and gestures so intimate that those who were closest to him could not help but weep when they discovered it. Fans cried not just for his absence, but for the revelation of what he had carried, quietly, through a life that had seemed, on the surface, glamorous and untouchable. It is impossible to talk about Eric Dane without speaking of the contradictions that defined him. He was a man whose exterior seemed unshakable, broad-shouldered, confident, charismatic, but behind that facade lay a boy shaped by struggles, by an upbringing that demanded resilience before he even knew what it meant. He was born in San Francisco, California, into a world that looked golden in the sunlight but often felt jagged beneath the surface. His parents, ordinary people with extraordinary expectations for their children, instilled in him the values of hard work, humility, and the quiet dignity of perseverance. Yet, the early years were not easy.
Money was tight.
Hopes and dreams were often tempered by reality. And from those constraints, Eric learned something vital: the worth of patience, the power of self-belief, and the necessity of courage in the face of uncertainty. From the very beginning, Eric was curious, observant, and precociously aware of the human condition. While other children played without care, he studied the movements, the expressions, the small dramas of family life around him. He learned, almost instinctively, how to read a room, how to understand the subtle shifts of mood and tension. That sensitivity, invisible in his early years, would later become a cornerstone of his acting, but in childhood, it was simply a way to navigate a world that sometimes felt unpredictable. School was a mixture of refuge and trial. Teachers noticed his talent early, often praising his ability to articulate feelings far beyond his age. Friends came and went, some loyal, some fleeting, yet Eric found solace in books, in stories, in the quiet hum of imagination. Literature became a second home, a place where he could step into lives entirely unlike his own, and in doing so, he began to understand the human spirit in ways few children of his age could. He carried that understanding like a secret armor, one that would shield him in the more turbulent years to come. Yet childhood was not devoid of pain. Adolescence brought with it a sharp awareness of the body, of the social hierarchies that dictated self-worth in ways a young boy could neither fully control nor comprehend. Eric, like many, struggled with self-image, grappling silently with insecurities that would never be spoken aloud but that would later inform the depth of emotion he brought to every role. In those moments, behind closed doors, he cried, he doubted, he wondered if he would ever be seen for who he truly was. But even then, there was a spark, a defiant insistence that he would not be defined solely by circumstance, by the limitations that society or family or even his own fears might try to impose. Family life, however, was the crucible that forged resilience. His parents, imperfect but devoted, offered a blend of strictness and warmth that left Eric both challenged and nurtured. Weekends were filled with mundane chores, errands, and obligations, but also with quiet lessons on responsibility, empathy, and the importance of integrity. Sibling rivalries, arguments over the smallest things, and fleeting moments of betrayal were tempered by laughter, late-night storytelling, and small acts of love that left indelible impressions. It was in these moments, folding laundry, washing dishes, listening to a sibling vent, that Eric began to understand the beauty of unnoticed labor, the richness of unheralded kindness, the unspoken currency of love. These lessons, absorbed in silence, would later echo in his career, giving his performances a depth that audiences sensed intuitively, even if they could not name it. High school introduced new challenges. Popularity, identity, the lure of rebellion, all of it collided with the quiet, persistent drive to excel, to make something of himself. Eric found an outlet in athletics and drama, discovering that the stage could become a sanctuary, a place where pain could be transformed into art, where awkwardness could be molded into charisma. He remembered years later, the way the spotlight felt warm against his skin, how the hush of the audience created a sacred space in which he could exist without fear. For a boy who had learned to navigate uncertainty, the stage offered a kind of liberation, a promise that expression could translate to connection, that emotion could be shared and felt and remembered. But ambition alone is rarely enough. Eric faced rejection early, auditions that ended with polite refusals, callbacks that never materialized, opportunities that seemed tantalizingly close before slipping away. Each failure was a test, a moment to either succumb to despair or to rise and try again. And rise he did, again and again, quietly, steadfastly, with a determination that would become legendary among those who knew him well. He learned to carry disappointment with grace, to transform it into fuel, to understand that even when doors closed, the journey continued. In those years, the contours of his future fortune, both material and emotional, began to take shape, though no one could have predicted the scale it would reach. Eric's early 20s brought both adventure and challenge. Leaving home, moving into a new city, navigating the complex and often unforgiving world of acting required courage that few could muster. He encountered mentors who saw promise where others saw inexperience, friends who offered support and counsel, and moments of stark loneliness that reminded him of the value of resilience. Money remained tight, every paycheck was measured, every expense weighed. Yet through frugality and diligence, he began to accumulate small successes, each one building toward the larger dream that had taken root in childhood, a dream not of fame alone, but of impact, of leaving something meaningful behind. In these formative years, Eric also learned the value of privacy and discretion. While his peers might have sought attention, he learned that there was power in quiet accumulation, in building without announcing, in investing not just in career, but in character. He saved, he planned, he nurtured relationships with care, and in doing so, laid the foundation for the fortune that would later astonish the world. This fortune was not merely the product of talent and opportunity, but of decades of unseen labor, of choices made in the shadows, of sacrifices that rarely made headlines. It was the material embodiment of a life lived with intention, the careful cultivation of both wealth and legacy. Amid all this, there were sparks of joy. Friendships that endured, small romances that illuminated otherwise gray days, moments of laughter so profound they seemed almost sacred. Eric cherished these, storing them in memory as one might store precious gems. He understood early that life, while unpredictable and often harsh, offered moments of brilliance that could sustain a person through even the darkest periods. And so he learned to savor, to notice, to hold close those fleeting flashes of grace that made existence worth enduring. By the time he approached the precipice of fame, Eric was no longer just the boy who had observed life from the sidelines. He had become a young man shaped by trials, tempered by disappointment, and invigorated by hope. Every audition, every minor role, every fleeting moment on screen was approached with a seriousness born of experience, an understanding that opportunity was fleeting and must be seized with both courage and humility. His performances began to bear the unmistakable mark of authenticity, emotion that was not learned, but lived. And slowly, inexorably, the world began to notice. Even as his career began to rise, Eric never forgot the boy he had been, the struggles that had defined him, the quiet lessons learned in kitchens, classrooms, and small neighborhoods. Those experiences informed his approach to both work and life. They gave him empathy, a rare quality in a field often dominated by ego. They gave him the ability to connect with audiences not through artifice, but through honesty. And they set the stage for a legacy that would one day move millions to tears. Not just for the fortune he left behind, but for the life he had lived with integrity, courage, and love. As fans watched his performances on screen, they were drawn not only to the handsome face, the commanding presence, or the undeniable talent, but to something deeper, the humanity beneath the surface. It was a humanity forged in the fires of a challenging childhood, refined through years of struggle, and polished by a commitment to authenticity. That same humanity would, years later, become part of the shocking revelation that would leave the world stunned: the fortune, the tangible and intangible legacy, meticulously curated, that he had left behind for those he loved. A fortune that was not flaunted, not boasted about, but quietly prepared, a final act of care and foresight that revealed a dimension of Eric Dane that few had glimpsed in life. Even now, recounting these earliest years, it is impossible not to sense the foreshadowing of what was to come. The boy who had navigated adversity with quiet determination had become the man capable of leaving behind a legacy that would move people to tears. Every challenge faced, every lesson learned, every sleepless night and small triumph was a thread woven into the intricate tapestry of a life that mattered, not just to those who knew him personally, but to a world that would come to mourn him, celebrate him, and ultimately weep at the realization of the full measure of his love, his care, and his vision for the future. Eric Dane's childhood, his formative years, were not defined by fame, wealth, or recognition. They were defined by the intimate and often painful truths of growing up, of learning resilience, of discovering the power of quiet strength. These truths, absorbed silently and carried faithfully, would echo throughout his life, culminating in a legacy so profound that it would touch every heart that encountered it, every family member who received it, and every fan who finally understood the depth of what he had given without ever asking for recognition in return. And as the world wept upon hearing the news of his death, as headlines screamed and social media trembled with sorrow, there lingered a quiet, almost sacred realization. Eric Dane had lived fully, loved deeply, and planned thoughtfully. His fortune, both emotional and material, was not simply a tally of money, but a testament to a life lived with purpose, a gift to those he cherished, and a reminder that even in loss, love endures. The boy from San Francisco had become a man whose absence would be felt in every corner of the world, whose life had prepared a final, astonishing act of generosity. And as hearts broke, as tears fell, and as silence settled in the spaces he once filled with warmth, the first part of his story closed. Not with an end, but with the promise of a legacy that would continue to inspire, comfort, and move millions to tears. Eric Dane's journey from a quiet, observant boy to a household name was neither swift nor simple. Fame, in its allure, is often imagined as instant, effortless. But his was earned through a relentless grind, through choices that demanded courage at every turn, and through a quiet resilience that few ever witnessed. The journey began with small roles, fleeting moments on screen, auditions that seemed endless and thankless. Yet each rejection, each polite "will call you" that never materialized, carved into him a fortitude that would carry him through the most turbulent years. He understood early on that perseverance was the only bridge between dreams and reality, and he crossed it with a patience few could fathom. Los Angeles became both battlefield and classroom. The city shimmered with possibility but weighed heavy with expectation. Eric, armed with nothing but talent and a steadfast belief in himself, navigated its streets with a mix of caution and daring. He took roles that many would dismiss, learning, always learning, observing how each character breathed, how each script held the potential to unlock some hidden truth. In those formative professional years, he encountered both kindness and cruelty, mentorship and indifference, but through it all, he never lost the quiet moral compass that had guided him since childhood. The turning point came when he landed his first substantial role, one that began to hint at the star he would become. It was a modest part, but Eric treated it with reverence. He poured himself into it, not just as an actor but as a man who had learned the value of honesty and attention to detail. His commitment was palpable, drawing the eyes of casting directors and audiences alike. Slowly, steadily, he began to attract work that mattered, roles that allowed him to inhabit a complexity rarely seen on screen. But success did not erase struggle. Long hours, self-doubt, and the relentless scrutiny of public life tested him in ways his early years had only hinted at. Each challenge, however, became a brick in the foundation of his eventual empire. Not of money alone, but of respect, admiration, and the quiet love of fans who saw themselves reflected in his performances. It was Grey's Anatomy that would cement his place in the hearts of millions. The show, already a cultural phenomenon, demanded more than mere acting. It required a presence, a command of emotion, a vulnerability that could make the audience laugh, cry, and feel in equal measure. Eric stepped into this world with both trepidation and determination. The pressures were immense. Days bled into nights, scripts demanded more than physical stamina, they demanded soul. And yet, he thrived. Every scene became a study in precision and authenticity. He captured the hearts of viewers not just with charm or aesthetic appeal, but with a rawness that felt human, approachable, and deeply real. Behind the cameras, the man Eric Dane had always been, the one forged in childhood struggles, the one who had learned patience and empathy, manifested in small, significant ways. He remembered his early years, the importance of kindness, the weight of mentorship, and he became someone who supported co-stars, encouraged younger actors, and maintained a humility that was rare in an industry defined by ego. His reputation grew, not just as a talented actor, but as a man of integrity, someone who understood the responsibility of visibility and the subtle power of influence. Fans began to notice. Letters arrived by the hundreds, emails by the thousands. Stories poured in from people whose lives had been changed by a single performance. Someone who felt understood during a dark night, someone who found courage after seeing him portray strength tempered by vulnerability, someone who wept silently in a living room, feeling less alone because of his work. Eric Dane's rise was more than career success, it was a profound human impact. And yet, amid this growing fame, he remained grounded. He did not allow recognition to define him, nor did he let the applause drown out the quiet values instilled in him as a child. But even amidst the ascent, the road was not without peril. Personal struggles shadowed his triumphs, moments of doubt threatened his confidence, and the public's gaze sometimes felt invasive, piercing, and relentless. Yet he endured. He found balance in discipline and in love, in family and in friendship, in moments of stillness that reminded him of the boy who had learned early that life's most profound treasures are often unseen. Every challenge he faced, every personal obstacle he overcame, became part of the invisible scaffolding of his legacy. He was building not just a career, but a fortune of the heart, a collection of trust, devotion, and the quiet, enduring bonds that would later move the world to tears. Eric's influence was not confined to television screens. He began to use his platform for causes that mattered, investing time, energy, and resources in charities, awareness campaigns, and initiatives that sought to make life better for those less fortunate. He approached philanthropy with the same meticulous care he applied to acting, ensuring that every contribution had meaning, that every gesture was intentional. Fans soon realized that his generosity extended beyond applause and accolades. It was embedded in the way he lived, in the subtle yet profound ways he left the world a little better than he had found it. As his fame expanded globally, so did the understanding that Eric Dane was more than an actor. He became a symbol of perseverance, a testament to the power of empathy, and a quiet hero to those navigating their own struggles. The fortune he accumulated was impressive, yes, but its true weight was in the values it represented, the planning and foresight that ensured his family would be cared for, and that his fans would inherit something more than fleeting entertainment. It was a fortune of thoughtfulness, of intention, a living reminder that even in a transient world, one could leave a mark that endures. In interviews, Eric often reflected on the paradox of success, the simultaneous exhilaration and isolation, the need to constantly prove oneself, the relentless attention that could feel both validating and invasive. Yet he spoke with honesty, revealing the man beneath the celebrity, the one who had once been a boy in San Francisco, unsure, observing, learning, yearning. His transparency endeared him further to fans, who saw not just a polished star, but a human being navigating the same fears, joys, and uncertainties as they did. Every laugh, every tear, every moment captured on screen was infused with the authenticity of a man who had lived deeply, felt profoundly, and understood the fragility and beauty of existence. And then there were the moments of almost giving up. The nights when rejection seemed insurmountable, when self-doubt clawed at him, when the pressure of expectation threatened to crush the fragile optimism he carried. These moments were private, but they shaped him in ways that were visible in every performance thereafter. The vulnerability, the depth, the capacity to inhabit another's pain or joy, these were gifts born from struggle. It was precisely these experiences that allowed him to connect so powerfully with audiences, to inspire not only admiration but empathy. His global impact was, in part, quantifiable, the awards, the critical acclaim, the countless roles, but it was also immeasurable. Millions of viewers, across countries and cultures, found solace in his portrayals. Teenagers saw him and learned courage. Adults saw him and remembered resilience. Families watched him and found moments of shared emotion that transcended screens. He became, in subtle ways, a healer, a mirror, and a guide. The wealth he accumulated facilitated this impact, but it was the man himself, careful, empathetic, disciplined, that made it profound. Throughout this period, Eric's attention to his personal life mirrored his professional dedication. Family, friends, and intimate relationships were nurtured quietly, intentionally, and with the same precision he applied to every role. He understood, perhaps better than most, that true wealth is not counted in dollars alone. Love, loyalty, trust, and care, these were currencies far more enduring, and Eric invested in them with an awareness that would later become part of the fortune that stunned the world after his passing. He traveled the globe, attended premieres, and worked on projects that stretched his capabilities. Yet he remained mindful of the impermanence of fame, the fleeting nature of applause. This mindfulness guided his actions, tempered his decisions, and ensured that every move was purposeful. Whether donating anonymously to a family in need or mentoring a struggling actor, Eric Dane was building layers of legacy that extended far beyond his name and lights. Every gesture, every thoughtful act, contributed to the emotional fortune that would one day leave fans and family alike in tears. Colleagues describe him as rare, someone whose presence could elevate a room, whose integrity was felt without declaration. It was this combination of talent, humanity, and foresight that made him unforgettable, both on screen and off. Fans sensed it instinctively, even if they could not articulate why he stood apart from countless other actors. There was a gravity to his existence, a depth, a richness that went beyond physical appearance or career achievement. Eric Dane became not just a star, but a touchstone, a reminder of what it means to live with purpose and intention. And then, slowly, quietly, he prepared for the inevitable. While still very much alive, he considered what he would leave behind, not in terms of ego or fame, but in terms of care. The fortune, financial, emotional, and symbolic, was meticulously planned. Family trusts, charitable contributions, personal letters, and small, meaningful gestures were woven together into a legacy that reflected his life's values. It was not flaunted nor broadcasted, it was a secret, a final act of generosity, designed to protect, comfort, and inspire those he loved. In doing so, he ensured that his passing would be accompanied not just by grief, but by gratitude, recognition, and a profound sense of love that transcended absence. Eric Dane's journey was extraordinary not because of the roles he played, but because of the life he led. Every challenge faced, every triumph earned, every relationship nurtured contributed to the impact he had on the world. And as fans watched his ascent, celebrated his victories, and shared in his artistry, few realized that beneath the surface, he was quietly constructing a legacy so powerful, so tender, and so thoughtful that it would redefine the meaning of fortune in the hearts of those left behind. By the time the world fully recognized the breadth of his contributions, Eric had already moved beyond the superficial markers of success. He had built a life rich in meaning, a career defined by empathy, and a legacy that would endure beyond his lifetime. The fortune he left behind, the culmination of decades of hard work, careful planning and quiet generosity, was both tangible and intangible, material and emotional, and it reflected the fullness of a man who understood life in its deepest terms, as fleeting, precious and infinitely capable of leaving joy, love and inspiration in the lives of others. The world would mourn, yes, but it would also marvel. For Eric Dane, the boy who had once observed quietly from the edges of life, had grown into a man whose presence and absence alike would move millions. And in the quiet spaces where grief and awe intersected, the truth became clear. He had built more than a career, more than fame, more than a fortune. He had built a bridge from his heart to the hearts of countless others, a bridge that would survive the harshest winters of loss, and that would ensure his essence, his love, and his impact endured far beyond the confines of time. The final days of Eric Dane were quiet, almost surreal, in contrast to the life he had led under the relentless gaze of the public. He had always been careful, intentional, aware of both the fragility and beauty of existence. Those closest to him describe a period marked by reflection, small joys, and the meticulous tending of relationships that had always mattered most. He spent mornings savoring sunlight filtering through the windows, afternoons in conversations that lingered on memories and laughter, and evenings in the gentle presence of family, fully aware of the impermanence of time. He knew his work had touched millions, yet he focused, as always, on what could be nurtured in the present. He wrote letters, left instructions, and ensured that every gesture, every detail, would protect and comfort those he loved. The fortune he had quietly accumulated was arranged with precision: financial provisions, charitable donations, and gifts carefully intended to honor those who had been constants in his life. But beyond the material, there was the unseen, the inheritance of values, the gift of lessons learned through a life lived with integrity, empathy, and purpose. These were the treasures that would strike deepest, moving family and fans alike to tears. On the day Eric Dane passed, there was a hush that seemed almost sacred. News traveled swiftly, yet even as headlines flashed and social media erupted with grief, there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something unspoken but universally felt, a recognition that a man of rare substance had left the world. Those who were with him remember a quiet dignity, a peace that comes not from resignation, but from having lived fully, consciously, and with profound care for others. There were tears, of course, sobs that shook bodies and hearts, but also an acknowledgement of the legacy he had already begun to leave, even before his final breath. The world reacted with a mixture of shock, sorrow, and admiration. Fans gathered in vigils, sharing memories, screenshots of performances, and personal anecdotes that reflected the profound ways his work had touched their lives. On social media, the grief was raw and collective, yet alongside it was a remarkable reverence. The tribute posts, the heartfelt letters, the shared photos, all spoke not just to the talent of Eric Dane, but to the humanity that radiated from him both on and off the screen. Across continents, strangers felt connected, linked by a shared awareness that someone extraordinary had departed, and yet had left something enduring in their stead. News outlets delved into the fortune he had left behind, a term that seemed inadequate for the depth of what Eric had prepared. The world learned that his wealth, amassed quietly over decades, was arranged with care: trusts for family, funding for causes close to his heart, and personal letters for loved ones and colleagues alike. But even more remarkable were the intangible elements: heartfelt messages to fans, instructions for charitable initiatives, and personal reflections meant to inspire courage and kindness. People cried not only for the absence of the man, but for the presence of the generosity and foresight he had embodied until the very end. It was rare, almost unheard of, to leave behind such a carefully constructed emotional inheritance, one that resonated as profoundly as any material fortune. Family members, in particular, were struck by the depth of his care. They discovered not just financial security, but thoughtfully composed letters and memories, small treasures that reflected years of observation, love, and intentionality. Each note, each directive, was imbued with the warmth and wisdom that had defined his life. Siblings, children, and parents alike were moved to tears, not merely by loss, but by the realization of how deeply he had anticipated their needs, how carefully he had crafted a legacy that honored their connection to him. In those moments, the true scale of his fortune became clear. It was not measured in dollars alone, but in thoughtfulness, devotion, and the tangible proof of a life dedicated to others. Fans, too, experienced the depth of this legacy. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, many recounting moments when Eric's performances had provided solace during illness, guidance during struggle, or simply a reminder of hope. The letters and initiatives he left behind, intended for public impact, revealed a man who had never stopped caring, never stopped thinking of the people who had supported him, even from afar. The world wept, not just for what was lost, but for what had been so intentionally and lovingly left behind. A fortune that bridged life and memory, tangible and intangible, reminding everyone that generosity and empathy are as enduring as fame or money. Even in death, Eric Dane's influence rippled outward. Colleagues spoke of a man whose kindness, humility, and professionalism had left a mark on every set he touched. Directors, actors, and crew members recalled not only his talent, but his unwavering attention to others, the generosity with which he shared wisdom, and the care he took to ensure that every interaction left people better than before. The fortune of his character, his generosity, and his lived example proved as powerful as the tangible estate he had amassed. To many, it became clear that his true wealth lay in the lives he had enriched, the courage he had inspired, and the lessons he had imparted simply by living as he did. The day of his memorial became a collective catharsis, a ritual of love and remembrance. Fans, family, friends, and colleagues gathered, some physically, some virtually, sharing stories, reciting lines from his performances, and reading excerpts from the letters he had left behind. There was laughter, there were tears, and there was an overwhelming sense of gratitude that someone so remarkable had chosen, in life and death, to give so generously. It was a moment that encapsulated the essence of Eric Dane, a man whose impact transcended entertainment, whose presence nurtured empathy, and whose legacy would endure long after the final curtain had fallen. Even now, months after his passing, the effects of his life and legacy continue to be felt. Fans discover new letters, new initiatives, and new aspects of the fortune he left behind, each one eliciting waves of emotion and awe. Scholars and critics have begun to study his performances anew, noting subtleties that reflect the depth of human experience he carried into every role. Families, inspired by the thoughtfulness of his final gestures, seek to emulate his example, demonstrating how one life, lived with care and intentionality, can ripple outward to affect countless others. Perhaps the most haunting and beautiful aspect of Eric Dane's legacy is how it balances the ephemeral with the eternal. He is gone, and yet everywhere one looks, his influence remains. In the performances that continue to resonate, in the people he helped directly and indirectly, in the fortune that provides not only comfort but inspiration. His life demonstrates that wealth is not merely measured in money, but in preparation, thoughtfulness, and the careful tending of relationships and values. Fans cry not simply because he is absent, but because they recognize the rarity of someone who leaves behind such a complete, tender, and intentional legacy. In reflecting on his life, it is impossible to overlook the totality of his foresight. He anticipated not only practical needs but emotional ones. The letters, the trusts, the initiatives, all were carefully constructed to nurture, guide, and comfort. In a world often marked by chaos and unpredictability, Eric Dane created order, care, and love that would endure beyond his own existence. Every tear shed by family and fans is also a tribute to the depth of his preparation, the seriousness with which he approached life, and the generosity that underpinned everything he did. Even as grief remains sharp, the story of Eric Dane offers solace. It reminds us that a life can be measured not just by its duration, but by the thought, care, and attention invested in others. The fortune he leaves behind, financial, emotional, and moral, serves as a testament to what it means to live fully, to plan wisely, and to love without reservation. His passing, though devastating, becomes a catalyst for reflection, appreciation, and even inspiration, demonstrating that the true measure of a person is often revealed not only in life, but in the legacy left behind. And so, as the world continues to mourn, to celebrate, and to absorb the shock of his absence, the reality remains clear. Eric Dane's life was extraordinary in ways that reach far beyond the surface. He had the ability to make audiences laugh and cry, to make colleagues feel valued and inspired, and to leave a fortune that was as much about heart as it was about material comfort. Every story, every memory, every quiet act of generosity contributes to an enduring portrait of a man who lived fully, loved intentionally, and ensured that even in death, his presence would be felt profoundly by those who mattered most. The haunting truth of Eric Dane's departure is softened by the awareness that his fortune, both tangible and intangible, serves as a bridge across time and grief. It connects the boy he once was, the man he became, and the countless lives he touched along the way. Fans cry not simply because he is gone, but because they have glimpsed the enormity of his generosity, the depth of his love, and the extraordinary foresight of a man who understood that the most profound legacies are often those that no one sees coming. In the quiet aftermath, as letters are read, trusts are distributed, and stories are shared, Eric Dane's legacy continues to grow. It is a testament to the power of intention, empathy, and love. The fortune he left is more than a sum of money. It is a living, breathing extension of his life, a reminder that even in absence, one can touch hearts, guide souls, and leave the world irrevocably changed. Fans weep, families embrace, and the world slowly, collectively, begins to understand what he always knew, that life is fleeting, but love, thoughtfulness, and legacy endure forever. Eric Dane may have passed, but in the fortune he leaves, in the lives he touched, and in the hearts he molded, he remains. And in that, there is both sorrow and immeasurable beauty. A reminder that even in death, a life lived with purpose and care can create tears of mourning, but also tears of gratitude, admiration, and wonder.